So today we're at the beautiful Kew Gardens, and there's a reason for that. It's been on my list 2, maybe 3 years. I can't believe I've never actually come across it when I've been down here. We've come today to film Kew Palace, which is one of the royal heritage palaces as used by the royal family years gone by. So we're going to give you a bit of the history of that as well. And before we get there, oh look, anyone know what the time is? Actually, this would be a good one. All right. So what is the time? So according to that, the time is 12:30. Okay. So it's 12:30, and I make it. Let's have a look. Digital watch. Oh, here we go. I make it 20 to 2. So allowing for the change in the clocks, I'm guessing it's about 10 minutes out, which is not too bad, I suppose, if you're literally going on the back of the sun. But I must admit, I do love sundials. They've just got that certain something about it. And this was put in here apparently back in 1959. So it's a replica of a proper sundial that was here before, and it was opened by Queen Elizabeth II. There you are. Lovely. So you've got this lovely little area here, and also on this spot in 1725, the Reverend James Bradley made the first observation which led to his 2 great discoveries, the aberration of light and the notation of the Earth's axis. Oh, and the telescope which had been used had been erected on here in a house which afterwards became the royal residence and was taken down in 1803. There you go. There you are. By command of His Most Gracious Majesty, King William IV. Right, let's get some more viewing of this palace, because we're going in, and let's go and see the Royal Palace. And the first thing you notice about the Royal Palace are the chimneys, and those Tudor chimneys sitting up on top. Can't believe this. One of the Royal Palaces I haven't been to in central London, and I think we're going to call this something like the palace that no one knows about, or the hidden palace that no one knows about. There I go. Making up titles as we go along. And I think also the palace itself has got a garden. So looking forward to going and having a look round there. Right. And with that beautiful view of the front of the palace, time to go in. By the way, it's open daily from 11 AM till 4 if you're here. That's beautiful.
So we're going to start off with a tour inside the house on ground level, moving up to the first floor. But just be aware, some areas are really dark, and the reason for that is they've pulled the blinds over to stop natural light from coming in and ruining the insides. Of course, if you ruin the insides, then it's going to date it and just not make it any good for future generations to come and see what was left behind. Anyway, we're also going to show you some of the bits. Here we go. Here's a flute from the 1700s, owned by King George III himself. And whilst we're showing you around the inside of the house and we're taking it in order, I'm also going to give you some of the history about Kew Palace. So it's a British royal palace within the grounds of Kew Gardens, and it's absolutely incredible because it's been here for, well, donkey's years, ever since I've been to Kew Gardens, and it's the first time I've actually found it. Yeah, it is. It's tucked away, and it's on the banks of the River Thames, which also made it really convenient for travel and getting to and from. And you'll see the Thames a little bit later when we're outside in the garden area. Now, Kew Palace was originally part of a large complex and few elements of it survive. It dates back to 1631 and it was built on top of an undercroft of an earlier building. Now, the main survivor, which is the house that we're in, is known as the Dutch House, and its royal occupation lasted from 1728 to 1818, with a short-lived final occupation in 1844. Now, to put the whole palace into a sort of context, the original building, which was built on the Undercroft, which this is now on, was originally built in the 16th century, and in fact it was around the time of Queen Elizabeth I in 1558, which is quite incredible because actually most stuff goes back to Henry VIII, but this is one removed. Yes, it's after him. Now, it's said that the land was owned by John Dudley and restored by his son Robert Dudley, who was the first Earl of Leicester and a childhood friend and court favourite of Queen Elizabeth I, and it was used as one of the main palaces to entertain Elizabeth in 1563. Now, the reason for this and the position of it is that one of Elizabeth's main palaces at the time was at nearby Richmond Palace, just a little stay down the river. See, all comes together quite nicely. So what you can see here also is the fact that historic royal palaces that actually maintain here. By the way, they also look after the Tower of London, Hampton Court and various other palaces. They really have restored it back. So you've got a lot of antique furniture and you've also got it set up as the King and Queen would have had it at that time. And remember, we're talking about King George III and his wife Charlotte. And this would have been the television of the day. Yes, they would have sat down after dinner and sat around the pipe organ whilst someone played and they had a good old sing-song. Or alternatively just sat down and listened. As you go around the palace, you've got all different pieces which have been kept over time, like this timer. Yeah, it's a sand timer. Plus you had the teapot before and various other bits and pieces. And you see as we go through, plus you've got paintings, but also we show you afterwards what the different items are. And then you just flick back on YouTube, just go back a little bit and have a look. Anyway, back to the history of this, well, little known palace. And in 1619, the building above the Undercroft was leased by Samuel Fortree, who finally demolished all but the Undercroft in 1631. And he then built the new, larger, south-facing manor house in its place. Now, Samuel Fortree, who was senior, was a merchant descended from a family originating near Lille, although the later confusion over his ancestry led to the building becoming known as the Dutch House. Now, that name also originated in the house's supposedly Dutch style of architecture, which was then known as artisan mannerist, and was dominated by Dutch gables. And the style was very popular at the time, but it's actually more prevalent in London, East Anglia and East Kent than the Netherlands at the time. All confusion all over the place. So, keeping the history going, in 1727, Queen Charlotte and George II came to the British throne. By that time, they had 6 children living with them at their summer residence at Richmond Lodge. And in 1728, Caroline leased the Dutch house, this one that we're in now, to house her 3 eldest daughters, Anne, Amelia and Caroline, and another nearby building which became known as the Queen's House, though the intended occupant was probably her son William rather than the Queen herself. Now this left Queen Caroline with her 2 youngest daughters, Mary and Louise, living with her at Richmond Lodge. Now George and Caroline had come to Britain in 1714, when George's father took the throne as George I. Now keeping notes here, so we've got George I and George II. Don't worry, there's another George on the way. So when George II succeeded his father George I to take the throne, Frederick, his son, who was his eldest son, became the Prince of Wales and was finally allowed to come to Britain, which he'd been banished from before. Now he arrived in December 1728, less than a year after his mother had taken the lease on the Dutch house. Now Frederick was 21 years old, knowing very little of his sisters and possibly wishing for a family rapprochement, and he soon took a long lease on the old chapel house at Kew, and in 1731 also purchased its contents from other people, and Frederick then set about remodelling the house with the assistance from William Kent, and it was later then known as the White House due to its plastered exterior, and that's a building which is almost adjacent to this one. Frederick was known for doing lots of tinkering around in Kew, and when he eventually died in 1751, which was from a chill combined with a pulmonary embolism, it all proved fatal, and his widow Augusta continued living at the White House, which is almost next door with their children. But one of their children was, yes, 2 eldest sons, George, who was the future King George III, and also Edward. All these Georges and so little time. Anyway, George, the future George III, actually took the throne in 1760, and a year later married Charlotte of Melzenberg-Strelitz, moving to Richmond Lodge as his summer residence as the family grew. Now I'll let you ponder on how many children they had. Are you ready? Got a number? Right. He and Charlotte had 15 children between 1762 and 1783. Let's face it, Scrabble hadn't been invented then. So Augusta maintained the ownership of the Dutch House and also the White House until her death in 1772, when all this then passed to her eldest son, George III. Now he demolished Richmond Lodge and switched his summer residence to the White House next door, and he also used the building to house some of his art collection, which was great. Now, George continued to use the Dutch house as a schoolhouse now for his two eldest sons. Yes, another George and Frederick. This would be the future George IV. Now, it led to be known as the Prince of Wales's house, or the house late of the Princess of Wales, though the future George IV would never live here. So the property was leased, but in 1781 George III purchased the freehold, and it was purchased for £20,000. 7 years later, George was kept in the White House during his first bout of madness from September 1788 to March 1789, with his wife Charlotte and their daughters living on the upper floors of the bedchamber area and also the grooms in the Dutch house. The White House was eventually demolished in 1802, and with the third bout of madness in 1804, George was housed in an upgraded single-storey service wing of the Dutch house. Now, the reason the White House was demolished is because George wanted to create a brand new palace at Kew, which was referred to as the New Palace, and this place was known as the Old Palace. Unfortunately, it never really took off the ground, and an old shell of it remained at the time before it was later knocked down. Unfortunately, George caught the fourth bout of madness and was sent to Windsor Castle, which is where he spent the last 10 years of his life. So it's beautiful. You can get into Kew Palace for free and you can have a good look round, just as we've done there and given you some of the highlights of inside the palace. But not only that, you've got the palace grounds as well, which are all within Kew Gardens, and you get this beautiful walk up to what is known as the Mound. And the Mound gives you a fantastic view over the back garden of the palace, but also out towards the Thames as well, and gives you a real idea of how close the Thames is to Kew Gardens and to Kew Palace, and why it was such a great place for palaces, so people could get between one and the other. Because don't forget, down the road you've got Richmond and also Hampton Court, and not forgetting Windsor Castle on the Thames as well. And as you overlook the gardens, you've got a car park at the back, but just beyond the car park wall, that is the Thames just over there. So within the gardens here at the back of Kew Palace, most of the plants here are from species grown in the 1600s or earlier, creating a historical journey into the British plant life. And now in May and June, the display of the flowers around the pergola is spectacular, and we're going to go through the pergola in a minute. This is a Venetian wellhead. And on this day, with beautiful blue skies and very few clouds in the sky, enjoy the gardens with a bit of background music, just to make it a little bit more relaxing and feel like you're there. So what did you think of Kew Palace? Had you heard of it, and have you popped in here before when you've been to Kew Gardens? Once again, it's completely free to get in once you've paid your admission price to get into Kew Gardens, so it is well worth the visit, but do check the opening times because it is closed during the winter. Well worth that walk around. Anyway, do let us know what you think in the comments down below. Now, one of the other palaces that we've been to, which is just a little bit further down the Thames, is Hampton Court, which is another amazing palace full of royal history, and we'll put a link to that video up in the top right hand corner. So if you click on that, I'll see you in there.